The grand ballroom was bathed in golden light, the chandeliers above sparkling like 1,000 tiny stars. Soft music played in the background as elegantly dressed guests chatted and laughed, their glasses clinking in celebration. Waiters in crisp uniforms weaved through the crowd, serving food and drinks. It was a perfect night. A night of love, wealth, and celebration. But for Amelia it was just another battle. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying to ease the aching pain in her back. At 7 months pregnant, every step felt heavier than the last. She was exhausted, her legs swollen, her body screaming for rest. But there was no time for that. She had a job to do. Balancing a tray of drinks in her trembling hands, Amelia forced herself to focus. One wrong step and she could drop everything. That would mean trouble. She inhaled deeply and took slow steps toward the nearest table, where guests were seated, chatting about business and luxury vacations. None of them paid attention to her. She was just another waitress to them, another worker in a world where people like her didn't matter. "Careful, dear," came a gentle voice from behind her. Amelia turned to see Mrs. Thompson, the head caterer, giving her a look of concern. The older woman had always been kind to her, always watching out for her when no one else did. "You shouldn't have taken this shift, Amelia," Mrs. Thompson whispered, taking a few glasses off Amelia's tray to lighten her load. "You're in no condition to be working." "I'm fine," Amelia lied, offering a small, tired smile. Mrs. Thompson sighed. "I know you need the money, but this isn't worth your health, dear." Amelia didn't respond. What could she say? That she didn't have a choice? That every penny she earned went toward keeping a roof over her head? That she couldn't afford to miss a single day of work, even if her body was begging for rest? Instead, she adjusted the tray in her hands and continued serving drinks. Across the room, the music swelled. The wedding was in full swing. Stefan, a billionaire who had made his money through hard work and his various business dealing, and Eunice, the socialite who came from a very wealthy family, were the reason everyone was gathered for the joyful celebration. The newlyweds were on the dance floor, locked in a slow, graceful waltz. Eunice's white gown shimmered under the lights as she smiled up at Stefan. Her arms were draped around his shoulders, and his hands rested on her waist as they moved together, looking every bit the perfect couple. The guests watched in admiration, whispering about how beautiful Eunice looked and how lucky Stefan was to have married into such a powerful family. For Stefan, this should have been the happiest night of his life. But something was wrong. As he twirled Eunice in his arms, his eyes wandered around the room. He wasn't sure what he was looking for until he saw her. At first he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. A woman cleaning a table. Her dark hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, and she wore a catering uniform. His breath caught in his throat. Oh, it couldn't be. His heart pounded as he tried to get a clearer view. When she turned slightly and he saw her face, everything around him seemed to fade. It was Amelia. The woman he had spent months searching for. Shock gripped him, freezing him in place. She looked bigger than he remembered, and exhaustion was written all over her face. But that wasn't what made his stomach twist in guilt. It was the swell of her belly. She was pregnant. Stefan's chest tightened. He felt his throat go dry. "Stefan." Eunice's voice snapped him back to the present. She was still smiling, expecting him to look at her, to focus on her. But he couldn't. He barely made it through the rest of the dance, his mind racing. As soon as the music stopped and the applause filled the room, he gently pulled away from Eunice. "Excuse me," he said, forcing a smile. "I need to greet some guests." Eunice nodded, too caught up in the excitement of the night to question him. But Stefan didn't go to greet anyone. He walked across the room, moving closer to the catering staff, his eyes locked on Amelia. She was speaking to Mrs. Thompson, trying to convince the older woman that she was fine, that she could keep working. Then he said her name. "Amelia." His voice was quiet but firm. Amelia froze. The tray in her hands wobbled slightly. That voice. She knew it too well. Her heart clenched, but she refused to turn around. Maybe if she ignored him he would go away. But then he spoke again, this time closer. "Amelia." She took a deep breath, steadying herself before slowly turning. Their eyes met. A storm of emotions passed between them in that instant. Stefan looked like he had just seen a ghost. His usually composed face was filled with disbelief, shock, and something else. Something deeper. Amelia, on the other hand, kept her expression cold, unreadable. Her grip on the tray tightened as she waited for him to speak. His gaze flickered down to her belly and his entire body tensed. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he forced the words out. "Is it mine?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but Amelia heard it loud and clear. For a moment she didn't respond. Then without a word she turned and walked away. "Amelia, wait." Stefan reached for her, but she didn't stop. He followed her, desperate. "Please, Amelia. Just talk to me." But she kept moving. Mrs. Thompson stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "That's enough, sir," she said, her voice firm. "Let her be." Stefan clenched his fists, feeling helpless as he watched Amelia disappear through the staff exit. The weight of his mistakes crashed down on him. Eunice was still celebrating, unaware of what had just happened. But Stefan knew. This wasn't over. Stefan laid in bed early the next morning. He had not been able to sleep throughout the previous night. His mind was in chaos. The image of Amelia standing there in a waitress uniform, 7 months pregnant, haunted him. He had spent months searching for her, but nothing had prepared him for the moment he would finally see her again. And in such terrible circumstances, he couldn't ignore this. He wouldn't. He needed answers. The next morning, Stefan sat in his office, his fingers tapping impatiently against his desk. His assistant, Leonard, stood in front of him looking uncertain. "You want me to track her down?" Leonard asked carefully. "Yes," Stefan said firmly. "I need to know where she lives, what's been happening to her." "Everything." Leonard hesitated. "Sir, if I may ask, why now? You spent months looking for her and now, after your wedding, you suddenly want to find her?" Stefan's jaw tightened. "Because I just found out she's pregnant, Leonard. And I have a strong feeling that baby is mine." Leonard's eyebrows shot up in surprise but nodded. "I'll see what I can do." As soon as Leonard left, Stefan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. If the baby was his, that meant Amelia had been carrying his child all this time, struggling alone while he had been planning a wedding with Eunice. A sharp pang of guilt stabbed his chest. Days passed with no success. Stefan had tried searching for Amelia himself, but she had vanished. It was as if she had built a wall around herself, making it impossible for him to reach her. But then a breakthrough came. Mrs. Thompson. She was the key. Stefan managed to get her contact information and arranged to meet her at a small cafe. When he arrived, she was already waiting, sipping tea. "Mr. Stefan," she greeted, her eyes filled with quiet judgment. "Mrs. Thompson," Stefan said, sitting across from her. "I need your help." The older woman took another sip of her tea before setting the cup down with a soft clink. "Help? I doubt there's anything I can do for you." Stefan exhaled, trying to control his frustration. "I know you care about Amelia. I do too. I need to find her." Mrs. Thompson raised an eyebrow. "You care about her? Where was that care when she was left with nothing? When she was struggling to eat, working endless shifts just to survive?" Her words hit him hard. He had no defense. "I made mistakes," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "But I want to make things right." Mrs. Thompson studied him for a long time before finally sighing. "She won't want to see you, you know." "I know," Stefan said. "But I have to try." After another pause, Mrs. Thompson slid a small piece of paper across the table. "An address." Stefan's heart pounded. "You didn't get this from me," she warned. Stefan nodded. "Thank you." The neighborhood was nothing like the luxurious places Stefan was used to. The buildings were old and crumbling, the streets filled with potholes, and the air smelled of dampness and exhaustion. Stefan parked his car and stepped out, looking up at the small apartment complex. The paint was peeling off the walls and the windows were cracked. This is where Amelia lived. His stomach twisted. He walked up to the building, scanning the doors until he found the right one. Apartment 4C. Taking a deep breath, he knocked. Silence. He knocked again, louder this time. After a few moments, the door creaked open slightly. Amelia stood there, her face tired, her hand resting on her belly protectively. When she saw Stefan, her expression hardened and she immediately moved to shut the door. Stefan reacted quickly, placing his hand against the door to stop it from closing. "Please, Amelia," he said, his voice filled with urgency. "Let me talk to you." She glared at him. "There's nothing to talk about. Just 5 minutes," he pleaded. "If you want me gone after that, I'll leave." Amelia hesitated before finally sighing and stepping aside. The inside of her apartment was small and barely furnished. A single couch, a tiny kitchen and a bed pushed into the corner. It was cold. Stefan swallowed hard as he stepped inside. This was how she had been living. "You have 5 minutes," Emilia said, crossing her arms. Stefan turned to her, his voice quieter now. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emilia scoffed. "You mean tell you I was pregnant while you were busy planning your wedding? Why would I?" "Because I had a right to know," Stefan said, his voice thick with emotion. Emilia let out a bitter laugh. "A right? Like the way I had a right to a husband who actually cared about me? A right to be treated like I mattered?" Stefan looked away, shame washing over him. "I was blind, Emilia. I made mistakes, but I never stopped caring about you." Emilia shook her head. "You cared about Eunice. You let her destroy our marriage. You let her win." Stefan exhaled, his heart aching. "I was wrong about her. But I'm not here because of Eunice. I'm here because of you. Because I need to know if it's mine." Emilia hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "You can't just show up now and expect me to let you in," she whispered. "I know," Stefan said softly. "But I'm not leaving this time." A long silence stretched between them. Then Emilia turned away. "You should go." Stefan took a step forward. "Emilia." "Go," she said firmly. Stefan clenched his fists, his heart heavy. He wanted to fight, to stay, to prove he wasn't the same man who had let her down before. But this wasn't a battle he could win in one night. So with one last look at Emilia, he nodded. "I'll come back," he promised. Emilia didn't respond as she closed the door behind him. As Stefan walked back to his car, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not even close. Stefan couldn't stay away. After their brief, painful conversation, he found himself driving past Emilia's apartment every evening, hoping for a chance to talk to her again. He knew she wouldn't make it easy, but he was determined to prove that he wasn't the same man who had let her go. Meanwhile, back home, Eunice was starting to notice. Eunice was used to getting her way. She had spent her entire life surrounded by power and wealth, and marrying Stefan had only been another victory. But something was wrong. Ever since the wedding, Stefan had been distracted. He barely looked at her, barely listened when she spoke. He came home late and left early. He wasn't affectionate, wasn't present. At first she tried to ignore it. But when he missed an important family dinner, something he would have never dared to do before, she knew something was seriously wrong. And Eunice didn't like being ignored. That night, she sat alone in their bedroom, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her phone screen. Then she made a decision. If Stefan wouldn't tell her what was going on, she would find out herself. The next morning, Eunice met with a private investigator, one of the best money could buy. "I want to know where my husband goes when he's not with me," she said, crossing her legs and leaning back in her chair. "I want to know everything." The investigator nodded. "I'll have something for you soon, ma'am." Eunice smirked. "Good. And make sure it's discreet." She didn't know what Stefan was hiding, but whatever it was, she would find it. And she would destroy it. Meanwhile, Stefan had started visiting Emilia's apartment almost every day. At first she ignored him. She wouldn't open the door, wouldn't speak to him. But Stefan wasn't giving up. One evening, when he knocked for what felt like the 100th time, she finally opened the door. "Why are you still here?" she asked, her voice exhausted. "Because I care," Stefan said simply. "And because I won't walk away this time." Emilia scoffed. "You say that now, but where was all this caring when I was losing everything? When I needed you the most?" Stefan flinched at the pain in her voice. "I can't change the past," he admitted. "But I can be here now." Emilia looked at him for a long moment before sighing. "You can come in," she said finally. It was a small step. But it was a start. As the days passed, Emilia slowly began to let Stefan back into her life, just a little. He would come by and help her with groceries. He would bring food, making sure she was eating properly. And sometimes they would just talk. One night, as they sat in her tiny living room, Stefan finally asked the question that had been haunting him. "What happened after you left?" Emilia hesitated, looking down at her hands. "I had nothing, Stefan. No money, no home. I had to take any job I could just to survive. I've been alone through all of this." Stefan swallowed the lump in his throat. "I'm sorry, Emilia. I should have fought for you. I should have never let you go." Emilia let out a bitter laugh. "It's too late for that now, isn't it?" Stefan shook his head. "It's never too late. For the first time Amelia's eyes softened. Just a little. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. But before Stefan could fix things, disaster struck. One evening he was sitting with Amelia talking about the baby when his phone buzzed. It was Eunice. He ignored it. A few seconds later the phone buzzed again. And then again. Finally Amelia sighed. You should answer. She's still your wife, isn't she? Stefan hesitated, but before he could respond, there was a loud knock at the door. Amelia frowned. Are you expecting someone? Stefan's stomach dropped. He already had a bad feeling. Slowly Amelia stood up and opened the door. Eunice stood there, her face twisted in fury. Behind her, the private investigator was standing silently, a thick envelope in his hands. Eunice stepped inside without waiting for permission, her sharp eyes moving between Stefan and Amelia. Then her gaze fell on Amelia's belly, and her lips curled into a cruel smile. So, she said coldly, this is what you've been doing. Stefan stood up. Eunice, I can explain. Explain what? Eunice snapped, throwing the envelope onto the table. Photos spilled out. Photos of Stefan visiting Amelia's apartment. Photos of him helping her, talking to her, looking at her like she was the only person in the world. Eunice laughed bitterly. You lied to me, Stefan. You made vows to me and now you're sneaking around with her? Stefan clenched his fists. It's not what you think. Eunice's eyes darkened. Then tell me, Stefan. Tell me the truth. Is that baby yours? The room fell silent. Stefan turned to Amelia, his heart pounding. Amelia took a deep breath, then lifted her chin defiantly. Yes, she said. It's his. A deadly silence followed. Then Eunice's face twisted in rage. You cheated on me, she screamed. I didn't cheat, Stefan said firmly. You and I both know that our marriage was never about love. You wanted power. And I was foolish enough to go along with it. Eunice's eyes burned with fury. You think you can just leave me for her? She turned to Amelia, her voice dripping with venom. I won't let you ruin my marriage. Amelia stepped forward, unafraid. I don't want your marriage, Eunice. I just want to live my life. Eunice scoffed. You won't have a life once I'm done with you. With that she stormed out, her high heels clicking angrily against the floor. But Stefan knew this wasn't over. Eunice would strike back. And when she did, she would come for both of them. The next few days were eerily quiet. Too quiet. Stefan knew Eunice well enough to understand that she wasn't the type to cry in a corner and accept defeat. No, she was the type to strike back with everything she had. And he was right. Amelia was in her tiny apartment, washing dishes when her phone rang. It was her manager from the catering company. Amelia, I'm so sorry, but we have to let you go. Amelia froze. What? Why? Her manager hesitated. The company received complaints about you. Clients saying they don't want someone with your reputation serving at their events. My reputation? Amelia whispered in shock. Yes. I don't know who spread these rumors, but it's out of my hands. The company doesn't want any trouble. Amelia's hands trembled as she held the phone. She didn't have to guess who was behind this. Eunice. Before she could process what had happened, there was a loud bang outside. She ran to the window and gasped. A group of men were loading all her belongings onto a truck. She rushed outside. Hey, what are you doing? One of the men turned to her. You're being evicted. Her heart pounded. Evicted? That's impossible. I paid my rent. The man shrugged. Talk to your landlord. We're just doing our job. Tears filled Amelia's eyes as she sprinted to her landlord's office. The old man didn't even look at her as he handed her a document. I'm terminating your lease. But why? Amelia cried. Someone made me a better offer for this building, he said simply. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. Her home was being taken away and he called it nothing personal. Amelia felt like the ground beneath her was crumbling. She had lost her job. She had lost her home. All in one day. And she knew exactly who was behind it. When Stefan arrived at Amelia's apartment that evening, he found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by boxes, her face pale. What happened? He asked urgently. Amelia looked up at him, her eyes hollow. Eunice happened. Stefan's jaw tightened. He had expected Eunice to lash out, but this? She had left Amelia with nothing. He crouched beside her. Come with me, he said softly. Amelia shook her head. I don't need your pity, Stefan. This isn't pity, he said firmly. It's protection. Eunice isn't going to stop. And I won't let you suffer because of me. After a long silence, Amelia finally nodded. She had no choice. A week later, the second attack came, this time aimed at Stefan. One morning he arrived at his company and found chaos. Employees whispered in corners, security guards rushed around, and his assistant looked terrified. Leonard ran up to him holding a newspaper. Sir, you need to see this. Stefan grabbed the paper and his blood ran cold. The front page headline screamed, Business tycoon Stefan Whitmore caught in love scandal. Cheating on wealthy wife with ex-wife pregnant with his child. Below the headline were photos of him at Amelia's apartment, of him looking at her belly, of them talking late at night. Stefan clenched his fists. Eunice. She had used the media to ruin him. And it was working. Investors were already pulling out. Stocks were crashing. His company, the empire he had built, was crumbling right before his eyes. Stefan took a deep breath. He had a choice to make. And for the first time in his life it was an easy one. That evening, Stefan stormed into his mansion, where Eunice was waiting for him with a smug smile. Stefan, she said sweetly, sipping her wine. You look upset. Stefan slammed the newspaper onto the table. What the hell did you do? Eunice's smile widened. Oh, this? Just making sure the world knows what kind of man you really are. You've ruined Amelia's life, he roared. Eunice's eyes turned ice cold. And I'll ruin yours too, Stefan. I gave you everything. My family made you. Without me you're nothing. Stefan stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. You think I care about the money? About the business? You think I'll stay with you out of fear? Eunice's face twisted with fury. You're choosing her over me? Stefan didn't hesitate. Yes, he said. I am. Eunice's hands trembled with rage. You'll regret this, Stefan. I'll make sure of it. But Stefan wasn't afraid anymore. Eunice had taken everything from him. Everything except the one thing that mattered most. That night, Stefan packed his bags and left. He didn't care about the mansion, the wealth, the business. He had made his decision. He knocked on Amelia's door, and when she opened it, he simply said, I'm done with her. Amelia stared at him, searching his face. What are you saying? I'm saying that you are my family, Amelia. You and our baby. I don't care what I lose. I just don't want to lose you again. Tears filled Amelia's eyes. For the first time she saw the man she had once loved. The man who had broken her heart but who was now trying to mend it. She didn't know if she could trust him again. But she wanted to try. And so she stepped aside and let him in. For the first time in a long time, Stefan felt like he was home. But Eunice wasn't done yet. Stefan and Amelia had barely begun rebuilding their relationship when the final blow landed. It happened in the middle of the night. A loud bang on the door jolted them awake. Stefan jumped out of bed and rushed to the door, his heart pounding. When he opened it, he was met with several uniformed officers standing outside. Stefan Whitmore, one of them asked. Yes, Stefan answered cautiously. You are under investigation for financial fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement, the officer said, holding out a warrant. Amelia gasped from behind Stefan, clutching her belly. Stefan's fists clenched. This is a setup, he growled. The officer didn't flinch. You can take it up with the authorities. Right now you need to come with us. Amelia grabbed his arm. Stefan. He turned to her, his eyes filled with determination. I'll fix this, he promised. Stay strong. As the officers led him away, Amelia knew exactly who was behind this. Eunice. And she wouldn't stop until she destroyed them both. The next morning, Amelia stormed into Eunice's mansion. The guards tried to stop her, but she pushed past them. She found Eunice lounging by the pool, sipping champagne, looking smug. You set him up. Amelia accused, her voice shaking with rage. Eunice smirked. Oh darling, you should thank me. I'm saving you from a lifetime of disappointment. Amelia's hands trembled, but she refused to back down. You've done everything to break him, to break me. But you won't win. Eunice tilted her head. And what are you going to do, pregnant and powerless? Amelia met her gaze without fear. I may be pregnant, but I'm not powerless. And I won't let you destroy the father of my child. Eunice chuckled. You're delusional. But Amelia wasn't backing down. She would fight for Stefan, just like he was fighting for her. Meanwhile, Stefan sat in an interrogation room, refusing to be broken. He knew Eunice had used her connections to fabricate evidence against him, but there had to be a way out. And then the unexpected happened. His lawyer rushed in with a triumphant look. "We found something." It turned out Eunice had been sloppy. She had left a paper trail, emails, transactions, and secret accounts that proved she was the one guilty of fraud. Not Stefan. Within hours, the charges against Stefan were dropped, and Eunice was the one facing an arrest warrant. The moment Stefan was released, he drove straight to Emilia's apartment. She opened the door, and before he could say a word, she threw herself into his arms, sobbing. "You're free," she whispered. "I told you I'd fix this," he murmured, holding her tight. For the first time they felt safe. And as for Eunice? She was arrested that very night. With Eunice gone, Stefan and Emilia were finally able to breathe. Stefan worked hard to rebuild his business from the ground up, this time without relying on anyone else's power or influence. And Emilia? She no longer had to struggle alone. One evening, as they sat on the couch together, Stefan placed his hand on her belly, feeling their baby kick. "I want to do this right," he said softly. "I want to be the man you and our child deserve." Emilia looked into his eyes, searching for doubt. But there was none. "You broke me once, Stefan," she whispered. "I need to know that you'll never do it again." Stefan cupped her face gently. "Never," he swore. "You and this baby are my world now." Tears filled Emilia's eyes, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of hope. 2 months later, Emilia gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. Stefan was there, holding her hand through every moment, whispering words of encouragement. And when their son let out his first cry, Stefan knew this was the moment he had been waiting for. Not wealth, not power, not success, but family. He turned to Emilia, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" she asked, exhausted but happy. "For giving me a second chance," he said. Emilia smiled. "Just don't waste it."